Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance in this re-airing of a conversation that we had about 2 years ago about the unsolved murder of Julianne Stallman. Lance, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Tim. I cannot wait to reintroduce this conversation, reintroduce this story to our listeners. It was honestly like a reintroduction for myself as well. I mean, 2 years is a long time. We have a lot of episodes that fill that gap in between. So to revisit this and to remember all of these details was moving. I don't mean that with any hyperbole. To hear the family members and advocates talk about the victim and the people who potentially did the things that they allegedly or potentially did to the victim moves me on such a level that it's hard to describe. Like, cannot wait to describe this in our final thoughts later on in the episode. So stay tuned for that, but generated a lot of emotions. Anyway, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And yeah, I am excited to introduce this conversation. We spoke with Jen MacPhee and Katie Wilshire in this conversation about the unsolved murder of Julianne Stallman from Butte, Montana on November 29th, 1994. It is a cold case that these two have been working on diligently for a while now, and just want to mention that discretion is advised in this conversation because there are a few disturbing moments here where we discuss some details.
Yeah, the murder itself is very, very brutal, so it's kind of hard to avoid getting into graphic details, like you said, when explaining this. But I feel like it's important to know like how frenzied this attack was. And Jen has a personal connection to this because Julie Stallman was her mom. So she's been trying to figure out what's happened to her mom, who's responsible, for years. And she's finally hitting platforms like podcasts and any sort of media outlet that she can in order to spread the word, because this is a small group of people who knew a lot that was going on in everyone's lives. And there's a lot of these details and elements that at first glance you'd think would be contributing factors to the murder. So the more noise that Jen makes, I think the more people are going to start opening their eyes and maybe saying some important details that they've been not saying for years.
And if you have any information, please send that to Crime Stoppers. You can send a tip anonymously that way. And this is going to be a 2-part episode, and we will include our final thoughts at the end of the interview, which is at the end of episode 2. So this episode might end with a little bit of a cliffhanger, and we will resume in part 2, which will be released tomorrow. All right, everyone, please follow us on social media at Missing CSM. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Jen and Katie. Welcome to the podcast, Jen and Katie. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, guys.
I'm doing great, too. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. We had been corresponding for a little while before having the two of you on, and just going to say it's always difficult to say this is going to be a great conversation when the subject matter is as dark and, I mean, yeah, it's dark and it's sad and it's depressing, but the two of you have come together and you have a great relationship and you kind of support each other. And when we had spoken in a pre-interview, it kind of felt fun. And I know that sounds weird to say that we can talk about something like this and, you know, have fun elements to it. So we've been looking forward to this conversation. Really, thank you for joining us, taking the time out of your day. We're more than happy to have you on.
I just want to say thank you guys for having us, and thanks, Katie, for doing all her background checks and just doing all the hard work. I feel like I don't do a whole lot of hard work on my end because I kind of have everything and know a lot. And so thank you for doing all the prep and getting Lance and Tim involved. Like, I'm super excited about this, and I feel like anytime I can get my mom's case out there and her story and my story, I feel so blessed and appreciative of any help and advice and ideas that I can get my hands on. So thank all of you guys. Thank you. I'm so thankful.
Well, your mom deserves to have her story told. And every victim does, obviously, but your mom was amazing and people need to know about her, and somebody out there knows what happened. And the only way we're ever going to find who that person is by doing things like this and getting as many people and as many ears on it as we can possibly get. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks for letting me in to your story and your case.
All right. Well, yeah, we want to hear all about your mom. But first, I just want to know a little bit about you both. What is your backgrounds? Where do you come from? How do you meet today to join us here?
Well, I was born and raised just outside of Butte, Montana, and I moved to South Dakota in 2001. I have a beautiful family. I have 4 grown children and 5 beautiful grandchildren. And I've kind of been just pursuing answers in my mom's homicide case since the very beginning. And it's just something that I can't ever stop doing or let go. And I have a great support system, very close friends and family that allow me to do this and support me in kind of everything that I've done, whether it was good or bad. I've done some pretty reckless things over the years involving this case, and a few things I probably should have thought twice about. But I'm not afraid, and I feel like my mom deserves answers, and I deserve answers, and my family deserves answers. And Katie was brought into my life a few years ago through a mutual person, Tim Montana. Katie's really good friends with his wife and him, and I'm not sure exactly how they got onto it. I guess I'll let Katie explain that, but Tim is from just outside my hometown where the murder occurred, and kind of just let Katie know about my mom's case. And then Katie reached out, and we've been communicating over, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years. It's been a little while. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was COVID time. It was quarantine when I started taking a deep dive. I've always been kind of tapped into some of the true crime circles. And when quarantine started, everything was on hold, obviously. And I started, Danielle, Tim's wife, and I started kind of deep diving and making up Google Docs for all these cases that we had been talking about over, wine and fire pits and stuff. We started just writing things down and building these Google Docs and sending each other, facts that we found in research and things like that. And your mom's case was one of the ones that we kept coming back to because of that Butte connection. And that was really the one that I could never stop thinking about. And I just feel like the answers are so there. It's all right there. It's just going to take, the right series of dots being connected for the answer to reveal itself. But Jen and I have been in touch since 2020, and she sent me a bunch of case material, and I've read basically everything that there is to read about this case, probably 10 times over. So as much as I can be involved for someone who's not, directly related, I feel really close to this case and close to your mom in a strange way, and close to you. And I feel like I know a lot about your mom, and she sounds like somebody that I would have really loved and probably had a great time with, just like you. So I like talking about her and hearing about her, and I'm glad to be here.
Can we explore that a little bit? I feel like it's always good to start off on something like that on a personal level. You said that if you knew her mom, you would like her. She seemed like somebody that you would like. What are some of the things about that? What was it about Jen's mom that appealed to you that made you think that this could have been like a good friendship?
Seems to me that she didn't take a whole lot of time to warm up to people. She seemed, obviously, she might have been guarded about, strangers and things like that, but she seemed like one of those people who would have been friendly off the bat, and you wouldn't necessarily have to work super hard for her to be kind and friendly and inviting and warm to you. I kind of feel like I'm like that, and I like people like that. I attract people like that in my life. So I feel like that would have been something I would have really loved in her. Obviously, she was a family woman. I'm a family woman. I have kids. I'm super close with my mom, and I have daughters, and I hope to be super close with my daughters when they're grown, which is hard to think about. But I think there are a lot of admirable qualities in Julie and little bits of her that we can probably all see and, kick-ass women in our own lives. I think there's a lot to her. She was obviously a complicated woman, and I think that's awesome. I love complicated people. You know, life is short, and you have one chance at making a story interesting in your life. And she definitely had a lot of interesting things going on in her world. I think that's great. So I've been really drawn to her whole story and the things that people have said about her. But obviously Jen knows exactly who she was.
What about your memories of your mom, Jen?
Thinking back, I wish I would have known her better as a young adult. I think like I was 21 as an adult, but I still feel like I was a child in a sense. I didn't get to know her as an adult, and I wish I had. But, you know, she was a creative, kind, thoughtful, generous, compassionate woman. She was strong. She, you know, was very friendly and happy all the time. She didn't like confrontation. If she was mad at you, you knew she was mad at you, but she liked to resolve conflict, or if people were fighting or something, she would try to, you know, kind of smooth things over in a sense. You know, she was smart. I mean, I guess there's just so many adjectives I could use to describe her that would all be great. And I think it's hard to describe somebody in a bad light or with not good words when you love them so much. And you know, she was my best friend, and she loved her family. She loved her grandchildren. She loved life. She was adventurous. She would try anything once. You know, she loved snowmobiling, and she tried to water ski once. She was unsuccessful, but she tried it, and she was afraid. She, you know, loved spending time floating the rivers in Wise River in the summertime. And she was a family woman. She just enjoyed spending time with her family. And I think, well, I know that's me. I would prefer spending days with my children and their children over anything else in the world. I work and I spend time with my family, and she did that as well. She had her time as well, but if there was something going on with the family, like, she was there. You could count on her for that. She was very dependable. She helped her parents. Her parents were getting older, and she was always there to help them. She was one phone call away. If anybody needed help and she could help you, she would most definitely do whatever she could to, you know, provide or help in any kind of situation. She's a great person.
Yeah, she sounds like she was really great.
She was fun.
Okay, so can you tell us what happened when you lost your mom?
So it was November 29th, 1994. It was Tuesday. It was just a normal Tuesday. It had snowed in Butte the day before quite a bit. She had gone to work on her regularly scheduled day. She got off work a little bit earlier. She was a waitress at Jacqueline's restaurant. So, you know, like in the service industry, if it's not super busy, you kind of get let go early. And so that day she had, I'm not exactly sure what time she did leave, but she did run to Kmart after she got off work, and we do have that time-stamped receipt. And then she went home. There were reports that she had stopped at a gas station in between Kmart and home, which is just a couple blocks from her house, but that I've never been able to find anything that was 100% accurate. So we know she went to work, she went to Kmart, and then she went home. She did wrap a present. That present was sitting on the dining room table. She changed her clothes from her work clothes into just a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and some tennis shoes. And then she ate. She had some leftover Thanksgiving dinner for lunch. And then she talked to my aunt on the telephone at approximately 3 p.m. My aunt says there was nothing unusual about the phone conversation. She didn't sound afraid or in a rush, or just nothing was different about that conversation, according to my aunt. Well, my aunt had called her to help her, give her a ride after my aunt got off work. And my mom had agreed to meet her at my grandparents' house, which was just a little ways away from where my aunt worked. So she said she was going to run to my brother's business, and then she would meet my aunt. My aunt got off work and went to my grandparents' house, and my mom was basically a no-show. I'm not even sure exactly anymore what time, but I got a phone call early in the evening from my brother, telling me that my mom was dead. And at first, I know this doesn't sound very right, but I thought my brother was playing some sort of a sick prank on me. It just didn't register that could be true. And so then when he said, no, she's dead, I immediately thought of a car accident because it had just snowed the day before, and I couldn't think of any other way that she would have died. And so I remember asking him how she died, and he told me, I think she killed herself. And I said, what are you talking about? How? And he said she slit her throat. And then I knew that wasn't right. I was like, there's no way that she killed herself, and not like that. So I don't know if he hung up or I hung up, but anyway, the phone call ended. And then I tried to call my mom's house, and nobody answered. I called a couple other people to see if they had heard from my brother or heard from my mom. And then I remember I called my grandparents' house, and my grandpa had answered the phone, and I asked if my mom was there, and he said no, that she was supposed to be there to help my grandma, and they hadn't heard from her. And then I asked if my brother was there, and he said no. And so I just hung up the phone, and at that point I was really calm, and because I didn't want to tell my grandparents that my mom had died, because at that point I didn't really know for sure, and I didn't want to be the one to tell my grandpa that she had died. So I remember I just loaded up my babies. At the time I had 2 daughters, and we drove down to my mom's house, and she didn't live very far from me, a few blocks. And so when we came around the corner, I saw the lights of all the police cars, and then we turned down her street, and before my husband at the time, before he even stopped the vehicle, I remember just jumping out and running towards her house. And I was stopped before I got to the sidewalk, and they asked who I was. I told them, and then the sheriff came out, and I just wanted in that house, and of course I wasn't allowed in the house. And then the sheriff had told me that she was in fact dead, and that it was being ruled a homicide, and that my brother was at the police station. And I remember him saying that since the next of kin had been notified, that they would be releasing her name on the 10 o'clock news, and so that if I needed to make anybody aware of the situation, that I had until 7 o'clock, because the news crews, they were actually down on the corner of the street by the time I got there. And so then I just went home, and I tried to contact as many people as I could before anybody saw it on the news, and especially my grandparents, because they religiously watched the 10 o'clock news. And I had the hardest time trying to track down my uncle, because I needed him to tell my grandparents, because I knew that it would just break their hearts into a million pieces. And I didn't want to be the one to do that. And so he did. He told them.
That's understandable that you didn't want to do that.
It was the saddest thing, seeing my grandparents when I walked into that house that night.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And so what happened after that? Did you go to the police station and give an interview? Did they want to talk to the family and gather everybody together? Like, how did the process start of making sense of everything?
I just remember telling everybody that that's where we would meet, would be at my grandparents' house. Once I got a hold of my uncle, and I knew that they knew. And so I think I got there like just after 10, and everybody just kind of started coming there. I remember there was phone calls in between. I called my mom's siblings, my stepdad. I called him. I just tried calling as many people as I could. And we just gathered at my grandparents' house that evening. And my brother, I think he got there a little bit after I did. I know I went to the police station the next day, and they must have initiated it. I can't remember. Everything's just kind of like a blur of like, because there's so many people and so many questions and so much planning to do. Even though I didn't do the planning, my grandfather did all the funeral arrangements and things like that. And I think that, I don't know. I mean, I guess the police must have initiated a conversation, or maybe they even came to my grandparents' house, but I don't know 100% sure. I just remember being at the police station and doing an interview and giving them whatever information I could that they had asked for. It's such a chaotic time, and so many people wanting answers and wanting to be involved. And, I remember my grandfather when because they did the autopsy, so they sent her body to Missoula, and my grandfather was very Catholic and kept wanting to like find out when she was going to be back to the funeral home because they needed to get her buried. And so when she did, I don't know, when the funeral was Saturday, visitation was Friday night. So I think everything it seemed pretty quick. But my grandpa went to see her at the funeral home on Friday, and I remember that was something very important to me, that I wanted to see her body, that I needed to see her body, because at that point things just weren't clicking. It still wasn't real unless I actually saw her. And so my grandpa went to the funeral home with one of my aunts, and he came back from the funeral home, and I remember when I saw his face, when he came back into the room, and he had all of her belongings, like her jewelry and stuff, that I knew that seeing her probably wasn't something that I could take. And so I didn't go there. And I think sometimes I feel like I probably should have. Looking back, I think I probably should have. But at the time, I made a decision and I decided not to go. And I think that was probably the best decision at the time. But I went to her house. I saw the crime scene before it was cleaned up. As soon as they released the house to us, I went in there because I knew that I needed to see that. I needed to see it and be in it so that my mind wouldn't just make up stories of what was there or what wasn't there. And I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I did that because I think even looking back at photographs, you can't really get a sense of the space and how horrific it was just from the photographs. So I'm thankful that I did choose to do that, but I kind of do wish I would have saw her body.
If we could go back a little bit, at what point were you informed that this was in fact a murder, and how old were you? How are you processing this at such a vulnerable age?
I had just turned 21 the month before. And so as soon as I got onto her street and the sheriff came out, the sheriff told me that it was a homicide. I didn't quite process what the word homicide meant, even though I knew what homicide meant. It just wasn't clicking in my brain at first because I could not imagine who would have done it and why. But I do remember saying, and it is in the police report, that I said something on the lines of "that bitch did it," and I was referring to Jamie LaProuse. So immediately after he told me, and it clicked in my brain what a homicide meant. The only person that my mind thought could have done this or had anything to gain from her death would have been Jamie LaProuse.
Okay, well, you brought up Jamie, so Let's talk a little bit about her. Who is Jamie?
So my mom at the time was dating a man named Brian Skinner and had been dating him for 4 years. And Jamie LeProuse was a young girl that Brian Skinner had been having an affair with for a long time. My mom was aware of Jamie LeProuse, and Jamie LeProuse was aware of my mom. Brian Skinner admits openly that he was dating both women, and his story kind of varies on who he was actually dating at the moment. When my mom died, he says he was dating my mom, and then, in another sentence, he says they were broken up. However, he did spend Thanksgiving with my family and my mom, which was just 4 days before she died. And Jamie LeProuse and my mom had some communication, through telephone calls. It appears that Jamie LeProuse had written my mom some cards, at least one card that I do have. But I believe there are others that the police department does have. So there was communication between the two of them. Neither of them was happy about the other one. I will say that Jamie LeProuse was quite a bit younger than Brian Skinner, quite a bit younger than my mom. She was only in her 20s when my mom died.
And Jamie and Brian are actually married to this day. They stayed together, from 1994 when your mom was killed to up until this day. And shortly after that Oxygen show aired an episode about your mom's case, we understand that they actually got married very shortly, almost immediately after that episode aired, which, could be inconsequential, but it's just a part of the story that might, be worth mentioning. They are still together.
Yes, they are together. They got married shortly after their after their interview with Paul Holes. They interviewed in June of 2019 and then got married, I believe, in the fall of 2019.
And your first thing that you said when you were told this about your mom, when you arrived at her house, was that bitch did this. What made you say that? Other than the interrelationships that were going on.
I think in the moment that I knew that my mom and Jamie had been having issues, that Jamie LeProuse had made some phone calls, had been threatening my mom, and I knew that was, at least to my knowledge, that was the only person that my mom was having issues with. And so I think that's why that came to my mind in the moment. I didn't think of Van Stallman and his wife. I didn't think of anything like that. I had known that Brian Skinner had been, in a sense, I don't want to say stalking my mom. In the summertime, she had been coming back from Wise River, and he was going out to Wise River. So there's a canyon. It's a 2-lane canyon between Divide and Dewey, Montana. And it's a very narrow road. And she was coming in through that canyon back to Butte, and she passed him. And he's got he had at that time a very distinctive car. So she knew that he was on his way out to Wise River, and he doesn't really have any business out in Wise River except to see if my mom was out there. And he openly admits in his interview with Paul Holes that he was driving by my mom's house and that he had communication with Van Stallman or Sherry Stallman or whatever. And so I think looking back at some of those things, it makes me suspicious that he was doing a lot more checking up on my mom than I knew at the time. But at the time I knew that he had been. And so, I knew that Jamie LeProuse and my mom had issues. And I thought the only person that could have benefited from her death would have been Jamie LeProuse.
There were a number of players in this too. Besides Brian and Jamie, there was Julie's ex-husband, Van Stallman, your former stepdad at the time, who had remarried since their split to a woman named Sherry Stallman. Both are now deceased. And at the time, your mom was still seeing Van occasionally, though it appears that her, boyfriend or, partner at that time was Brian Skinner. She was still seeing Van Stallman on occasion. as far as everything that we are aware of, Van's current wife at the time, Sherry, was also aware that her husband was seeing his ex. She actually confronted Julie quite violently. Was that was at the Wise River Club, wasn't it? That she confronted her in the bathroom and said, I know what you're doing. Stay away from him, that sort of thing. So, a lot of these people involved, basically everybody involved had, their own love triangles going on, which obviously just complicates the whole situation. But there are definitely a small handful of people who would have had their own selfish reasons for not wanting your mom around anymore.
One thing that is impressive to me is that, Jen, that's where your head went when you heard the news. And I was trying to put myself in your shoes. If that had happened to me, I think my first thought would have been a robbery gone wrong or something. I wouldn't have gone directly to an individual, which shows to me how much those relationships resonated for you. That they whether you knew it consciously or subconsciously, you knew that these were toxic relationships. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, for sure. And in that moment, like I said, I think that's just like the only thing that came to my mind in that split second. And for the longest time, I didn't even remember that I actually said that until, reading back the police reports and things like that. And that, and then she actually, whoever the police officer was, I can't remember her name, but she actually puts that in her report that I said that. And again, like it was the only person at the time that I thought could have, had anything to do with it. Because I thought, who would have wanted to kill my mom? She was, like this little tiny barely 5 foot 1 inch tall person, 127 pounds soaking wet. And then when I realized the brutality of it and how horrific and violent it was, that makes me think a lot harder about who could have done it, because it's like, how do you do that to such a tiny little person? How do you do that to anybody? But it really isn't I really can't imagine it taking a whole lot to hurt her. She was little. She was just this little person. And so it's like, to have that much hatred and to cause so many violent injuries to a person, like why do you have to go above and beyond like that and make it such overkill? Just do it and be done, and I will say that, so up until today, just this afternoon, I read the entire autopsy, and I'm not sure why I read it today. I think I just wanted to try to make sure that I knew exactly the injuries and how bad it was, because up until today I hadn't read but just a little bit of it. And so there's a lot of things in that autopsy that I'm like, what the, like, she fought so hard. I can't even imagine. And I always imagined it was quick. I imagine it was quick. It probably didn't take that long. But the amount of injuries and the severity of the injuries that happened to her make me physically ill. And I think when I first read just a snippet of the autopsy, when I got it back in January, I read a few lines and I did get physically ill. And I thought, okay, this is too much for me. When you stab somebody in the neck and it comes into their mouth, the heartache and the pain that created for me, it just left me broken. And so today I read it, and it was brutal. It was brutal, and it hurts my heart, and it makes me sad that somebody hated her that much, that they could cause that much damage. And I don't know why you would want to erase somebody's existence off the planet over anything. I don't know what or why, and I feel like that's what's keeping me going, is because I need to know the who, because I don't think I'll ever know the why.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I've read the autopsy a couple times from start to finish. I think, obviously, you're right. The number and severity of the injuries, and it wasn't just stab wounds. There was some show of neck compression. She had a lot of bruising and different things like that. I think what that screams to me is that she put up a hell of a fight, which I think tells us something about her, which we probably already knew, but it might also tell us something about her killer. I think it's clear from the autopsy when you read each description of each wound, like numerized like that and described like that, it's pretty clear that whoever this was, for whatever reason, was not able to physically dominate her effortlessly, quickly, completely. This dragged out. There were multiple locations that this fight took place in. It started by the fridge. She made a break to exit through the doorway that connected the kitchen to the dining room. We have a handprint and blood on that door frame. Some blood evidence that she did make it out of the kitchen and into the dining room and then was dragged back in. She had buttons ripped off of her blouse, and some were broken, and she had hair between her fingers. She put up a hell of a fight, and this person probably would have been injured themselves. I mean, we've seen this in other cases. Anytime you're using a sharp object, especially when blood is involved, you're likely to injure yourself. And she had a lot of defensive wounds. I think it's important to remember that this probably wasn't somebody who effortlessly overpowered her. I think there would be a lot less injuries, maybe more post-mortem injuries, which we didn't see. I mean, all of these injuries were pre-mortem injuries, peri-mortem injuries. She was alive, fighting for her life with all of this. I think that says a lot about the control over her that the killer did not have, which is interesting and not super expected with, like you said, such a small woman. I think it would be more explainable if there were less injuries. That's always been something that's jumped out at me. It seems like the killer had a really hard time holding on to her.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you bring up, because that also maybe implies that this was somebody who was close to her in the sense of she knew them or they knew her, and not like a random somebody who had broken in and it was a robbery gone wrong, because those types of people to me are ones that they're not going to be as reckless in their criminal acts when they happen. You know what I mean? Like if it was a robbery gone wrong and the person who is trying to, I don't know, like fight off the homeowner, I certainly don't think is going to stab them so brutally and so viciously,
Well, and what would be the incentive? Say I'm a convict who's breaking in. I say I see a woman at the gas station or at Kmart, or I just stumble by a house and I'm interested in breaking in and stealing her stuff. We know that there was no sexual assault, so that wasn't the motivation. And if it was the motivation, it didn't get anywhere close to that. She was still fully clothed and no evidence of assault like that. So say I'm a convict and I'm breaking into a person's house. I'm most likely injured myself in this attack. I see my potential victim running away from me through a doorway that's going to put distance between them and me, my injured self. I'm hauling ass out the back door and getting away. If I'm a stranger to this person, it's going to be hard for them to identify me. The fact that they felt like through the risk to their own life, this person was probably not in a bubble suit. Risk to their own life. The fact that they felt like they needed to stay there and bring her back into this confrontation and finish what they started implies to me, like you said, Lance, that she knew them and they knew her. And if she had survived, she would have undoubtedly been able to identify them to, a police officer. So once again, I mean, I think the circle for this case is this big, and I think the answer is right there in the middle of it. And this case, just all of the physical, evidential, information supports that in every way, in my opinion.
Now, can you tell us about this, altercation that Julie had with Sherry at the Wise River Club about a month before?
So it was opening night of hunting season. Well, hunting season would have been the next Sunday. So they always have like this big party. And so they had a band. And we went out there to the Wilshire Club. My stepdad at the time had owned the Wilshire Club. So it was nothing new for us to go out there and have a good time on the weekend. So we had gone out there. It was my mom and I and one of my friends. And at some point during the night, my mom had gone to the bathroom. And Sherry had followed my mom into the bathroom and closed the door behind. She walked into the bathroom. It was only a single stall bathroom. So my mom had gone in there, and then Sherry had gone in there. I'm not sure if my mom was on her way out, and then Sherry kind of pushed her back in. I don't know why. I don't know how Sherry ended up in the bathroom with my mom, but she did. And she told my mom to stay away from her husband or she would cut her head off. And she grabbed my mom and she pushed my mom up against the wall. And when I saw Sherry go into the bathroom after my mom, I immediately got up to go in there. And by that time, it happened rather quickly. My mom was coming out. Sherry had already come out past me, and I went to make sure my mom was okay. And my mom explained to me everything that had just happened. And Sherry had admitted to that altercation had actually occurred in her police interview. Also in Sherry's interview, she talks about how my mom would always call her house. And that is untrue. We went back and looked through 6 months of my mom's phone bill. And there wasn't a single call from my mom's residence to Sherry Stallman's residence. If my mom wanted to talk to Van Stallman, she would call the Wilshire Club. And there were numerous long-distance phone calls made to the Wilshire Club on her phone bill. But Sherry Stallman, when she was interviewed, it was a very short interview. It was like 13 minutes long. And I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday. I think it was Thursday after my mom died that she interviewed. But she talks about that altercation, and she admits that actually happened, and that she told my mom that. So that's not hearsay. I had somebody email me one time saying that I made that up, that I was just making shit up. And I guess to put blame on Sherry, I don't know. But anyway, somebody had emailed me and said that, stop making shit up. And I'm not. I was there when it happened. It's not hearsay. And Sherry admits to it. She openly admits that altercation happened. And it was exactly a month before my mom died. And I think one of the reasons that not just the altercation itself hit so hard is because, my mom's nearly decapitated during the incident. You could see her spine through the gaping hole in her neck. And there are marks on her spine, cut marks, that are noted in the autopsy. So I think once I kind of thought about things after that initial shock of it all, I think I remember thinking that Sherry Stallman had something to do with it. Again, because my mom was still seeing Van and Van was still seeing my mom, and everybody knew it. Brian Skinner knew about it. Sherry knew about it. My mom's friends knew about it. I knew about it.
Now, when you say that, she was nearly decapitated. I'm looking at the autopsy right now. 7 slice marks to her throat. It sounds like an aha moment, right? I remember you telling me that. I remember reading the autopsy and being like, we have the answer. Here it is. The problem is we have partial DNA, male DNA profiles in this case, some from back in the day, more recently to the time of the homicide, some that have been retested and revealed new male DNA profiles that match old pieces of information. I want to get into that too, because that's really compelling stuff. But there's an inner circle of 18 people, or is it 28 people, Jen, who have been tested against this DNA?
28 individuals have been tested against the unknown male DNA profile that we do have on record.
So the first DNA profile that I was made aware of from the scene was on a kitchen towel draped over or kind of tossed into the sink that had blood in it. The murder weapon, which is a large knife. It's believed that it was taken from her kitchen knife block, taken from the scene. That knife has never been recovered. But that missing knife matches the incised wounds on the autopsy measurement-wise, so that's why they think that's the murder weapon. It's likely that the killer probably washed their hands or maybe their own injuries in the kitchen sink dried themselves off with a kitchen towel. There's a partial male DNA profile collected from that kitchen towel, as well as underneath where they would have been standing, a little kitchen rug under the sink. There's the same partial male DNA profile taken from that kitchen rug and the kitchen towel. And then years later, they collect some DNA from the legs, basically the ankle of the jeans that Julie was wearing at the time, because we know that her body was moved at least once. There are 2 substantial sized blood pools, one a different location from where she was found laying. The second was underneath her at the time that she was found. So we know she was moved at least once because of that pooling. So it's believed that the killer pulled her from her jeans or her shoes, and we got a male profile, partial male profile from those jeans, which is the same male profile as the one that was found on the kitchen rug and the kitchen towel. So these are all, crime-related locations. It's not as if we found, latent print on the fridge and that could have come from any time before. This is the killer's DNA. And it's not matching to anybody in that 28-person inner circle, which is wild.